It's
Welcome
11:11.
back. There's still one more minute for me.
Oh,
Welcome back, everyone, to the Beauty Way. Today it is Kirsty and I, and we're going to riff off about her trip to Egypt. And so just recently, only 8 weeks ago, you went off. Was it even that long ago? You went off
yeah,
on
no,
her
I think
trip.
it was like, no, it was like 6 weeks maybe.
6 weeks ago, you went off
Yeah.
on a trip to Egypt, and there was such a beautiful lead up to that trip. And I feel like when we're in this journey where we're consciously co-creating with everything, we start to understand that our travel and our trips around the world are for more than just tourism. And there is so much happening in the field when we travel to different places and we receive different things and we have different experiences that connect us with all these multidimensional aspects of ourselves and all the things. And so today we wanted to talk about that and how Egypt has impacted Kirsty and what I guess called her to that in the first place and what has unfolded since then. And so where do you want to start, babe?
Well, what you just said then, I love it because I've had the realization this year about all of the travel that I've done. And I've known for quite a long time that the importance of my family and the way that we've raised our daughters and our little family as a unit traveling to places. And I was actually just reflecting yesterday on this year, and we traveled to Bali in July as a family. And it's only in hindsight since I've been to Bali that I realized that the trip to Bali was actually related to mother codes for me.
Mm-hmm.
And the trip to Egypt was related to source code. So there was a cleansing of mother line that happened when we went to Bali because of the circumstances surrounding. And then when we went to Egypt, there was a very strong intention that was associated with that. And it didn't initially happen the way that I'd expected that it would happen, but it obviously it unraveled perfectly. And I was called to connect with somebody. I knew that I would receive the perfect guide, and I received the perfect guide. And from the moment that I got her first email, I knew that she was going to be the person that would guide us there. And one of the things that I loved was when I had a conversation with her on the phone, she said, "We're not going there as gods and goddesses. We're going there as source code. We're going to travel the country as source code." And for me, in the intention for this trip and the way that it had come to me, that was so perfect because I knew that I would be resetting, recreating, purifying my own source code, which creates, as you said, which creates a whole new story for humanity.
Totally. And for people who this might be new to, all the different like spaces and places and locations in the world are all coded with different coding that has been, I guess, placed there through historical in our linear timeline, but also in a multidimensional timeline. And so when we think about all the different locations in the world and you think about like the historical nature of what has happened in those different places, when we go to these places, we can both pick up and upload coding, but we can also go through purification and upgrade processes for ourselves. And then we can also share codes from different places and spaces through our genetic DNA. And so I love that the intention was to come back to that source code because something around the history of Egypt, for example, is a lot of the stories and narratives that come through the very human history of Egypt aren't all positive.
Yeah.
And yet the multidimensional, when we go into the higher realm aspect of Egypt, there is some really potent and powerful codes. And so to come in there with that lack of story feels really, really amazing. And so just before we started, you mentioned something about the coming in with no story. I want you to expand on that, please.
Yeah, well, there's a moment in time that I wanted to share with you was we went to the Valley of the Kings, which is down on the Nile. And we were briefed by our guide, who is an Egyptian guide. We were briefed by him when we arrived at the Valley of the Kings, and he was sharing different stories and the different symbology. And Egyptians are master storytellers, like they're masters of the myth. That's why we're so fascinated by them, because they are such incredible storytellers. And he was sharing the story with us, and then we were to go down into several of the tombs. And one of the tombs that we walked down into, it was about 100 meters down under the ground that you go down. And the whole way down there is story on the wall. So the story, and you could be there for weeks, months even, translating the stories that are on the walls. And as I walked in there, I was given the really clear knowing that I am to walk down this pathway with paying no attention to the story. To be completely in myself and to be completely present with what is. And this was the tomb. This is like Osiris's tomb, essentially. So it's the whole story of Osiris, who was the god who was dismembered by his brother. So he was dismembered, 14 parts of him were scattered across the country. I don't consider myself an expert in Egyptian myth. So if there's little parts of the story that I get wrong and there's experts that are listening to this, I do apologize. But I also receive it from my knowing as well. So when I went down there, I knew that as I was walking down there, I was being activated by the energy that was in the earth. And when we're coming from that place of being source code, that's what we are, because each of us agreed to come here to this earth at this time as a star, if you like, and we were encoded with different codes, and coming to earth, this is my interpretation, activates those codes within us. And when we, like you said, when we go to different points on the earth, if we've been here many times before, not necessarily consciously, those codes get activated within us. And I knew that as I was going down there, I was being activated into these stories, which is allowing my body to integrate the truth that I am all of this. Because the story of this particular story essentially is to allow ourselves to know that we are all of it. And because the gods know that the humans know that they are gods, and the gods know that they are humans, and we are one and the same, and we work together to co-create on this magnificent planet that we call Earth, this playground that we have every single day. Did I answer the question then?
I can't even remember what the question was. We were talking about coming as source code and outside of the story, and then you went into the piece around going down the stairs.
Yeah.
And
I
so
think,
yes and no.
yeah, so it is so there's a story there that I could focus on that is seemingly outside of myself. But when I walked down the pathway and I was within myself, I was receiving all of that story. And at the same time, I was integrating my own story as source, my own truth as source. I was aware that all of these stories exist. And my intention was to integrate that, yes, all of these stories exist, but I'm the creator. And so I get to integrate all of this story as part of me. And in this moment is the beginning of everything.
Amazing. And when you tap into the story, do you connect with the different, I guess, the way that I see it is that there's always layers to a story.
Yeah.
And there's always multiple perceptions of a story. And there's always, you know, as we say, there's always three sides to a story. There's actually many, many more than that. But when you think about it from this perspective, and you think about the stories that are being told, they're still being told from a perspective. And so I'm always curious about when it comes to history, obviously they're being told by a particular perspective. And so was it part of the process to tap into the most purified version of that story?
Yeah. So that was part of my process. And obviously, everyone who's there has their own experience. And so the guide gives, and our guides were very conscious, and they understood where we were coming from as well. So we weren't there just to get the official historical version. They knew that we were there to see beyond that. And so there are different layers. And when you go to Egypt, the guards and things are very protective of the tombs and of the temples. And there's a lot of protection there. And so having the right guide is really important as well to help you to move into them. It's actually quite challenging to talk about it in a multidimensional perspective, because my journey was to come here and live a very human existence. The same time, I also see from that very overarching perspective, there's so many layers to communicate. And so those things that were created in the country, in Egypt, were created to assist humanity to be its most harmonious version. And when we go there as source code, we are tapping into the technology that has been created to help us remember harmony. And so when you tap into that, you take into account the story that's been created, because the story is actually really important, because Egyptians are master storytellers and they're telling the story to help us remember. So the story of Isis and Osiris, which was what really connected me to Egypt in 2014, like 10 years ago, was what helped me to begin to learn more. Because when James came home from Iraq and he had PTSD, and I realized that part of my role was to help him to remember his humanity. And so when I heard the story of these two lovers, I really resonated with her traveling the countryside to remember the parts of his body that had been scattered around because he'd been murdered by his brother. And so the story is there. And then I get to tune into how that feels in my body and how it resonates with me. And when I do that, I'm activating my own codes. And then I get to feel even deeper when I'm on the land. And so as I'm on the land, when I'm with the right guide, I'm getting to tune into the purpose of the technology that was originally created, which was for harmony. So therefore, I'm integrating deeper harmony within my body. And then I'm remembering the aspects of me that have lived in that time, because time isn't linear, and participates in the creation of the harmony. So, for instance, we went to a temple where there were vessels, which it was very obvious that these vessels were created for purifying and ionizing water. And then there's a lot of vessels that have been created for using sound technology to create energy across the land. And there's a story that I wanted to share in relation to the stones. For instance, we went to one of the temples where the official story is that there were tombs for bulls in this, because there are these sarcophaguses that are like 80 tons worth of sarcophagus granite that are underground. There is no explanation as to how they could have got there in the first place, but they were told that they were sarcophaguses for bulls. But when the lids were taken off these granite boxes, there's no bulls inside. and the inside of the sarcophaguses are shiny. So the granite has been polished on the inside. So why would that happen for bulls? And so as we went in with our guide who's sharing the story with us, and also we're integrating the feelings that are in the earth and the rock, the granite, I placed my hands on the granite at one point and my whole body was just so incredibly hot. I felt sick. I felt nauseous. And I allowed myself to be down there. And I just let my body feel what it needed to feel and let my body integrate. And then as I was walking through the tunnel after I'd been there and on the way out, I was shown that I was actually, in one lifetime, I was a singer in that temple. So I was working with the Resonance for Harmony. But then in another lifetime, I was actually one of the priests who was distorting the technology so that humans weren't able to use it effectively. And so in that particular temple, what I did was harmonize those polar aspects of myself and bring them into this moment.
You know, as I was hearing you then, I was thinking about how much history, memory, knowledge, information sits within like inanimate objects. An inanimate object being the wall, for example, I was going to say bricks, but it's not really bricks, stone.
Yeah.
And how people just so naturally kind of feel gravitated towards like putting their hands on the wall. Like it's such a thing to do when you're in any type of sort of monument style historical space. You know, there's this like draw towards placing hands, and the coding that is, you know, those walls have memory.
Yeah.
They remember, it's all coded there as to what has happened in that space. And so to tap in and get this like memory, like you said, of these different aspects of yourself across time, space, multiple different realities, etc., I think it's something that people don't really have the like, huh? Like, it doesn't really, what do you mean? You know, and I think it's an important part of the story is for people that haven't tapped into that before, that is a really important part of the process. And our DNA is the kind of computer library of all of the lifetimes that we've ever had in our consciousness. And so to connect the wall with the DNA, it's like oh, I remember, boom.
Yeah.
And so there's like you said, that there's this activation that happens of memory. And the memory, for those who haven't had this type of experience before, isn't necessarily always as clear as what you said. I was a singer, I was the priest. Sometimes you don't have an understanding of what is happening, and the way that it integrates into our reality are really subtle shifts and changes through our relationships or through the way that we show up. There will be things that alchemize and shift because our unconscious is the one that's having the kind of memory experience in that it's not necessarily conscious. And so it's really cool when we can have a conscious experience of it and have memory like you had.
Yeah.
And it's not always the way that people experience it. And it doesn't make it any less powerful either to not have that like peace. And
Absolutely. And that's been uncommon for me. That's not usually how I've received information in the past. And I think from what you've said, like our mind cannot comprehend and understand what it is that we're talking about because our mind thinks we're separate. And so there it is all about, and our mind also has the story, and it's such a small piece of the entire equation. And when we allow ourselves to put our hands and things on the wall is because that's an activation of like, be in your body, be present here now, and get out of your head and come into full presence. Because my intention when I was going there was quite strong and I was quite connected to my intention, I believe that the intention set the pace for me to find the right guide to be guided to these situations, because I was always coming back to it was like my north node, if you like. And I was always remembering, okay, what's my purpose here? What's my purpose? And my purpose is that I'm integrating codes for the next phase of my journey. And the next phase of my journey is a reclamation so that I can be even more powerful in my own sovereignty, because that's what I'm here to offer my daughters and future generations, is this level of sovereignty that we've not previously had. Our parents and their parents' parents, it's kind of been diluted, if you like.
Totally. And so how, in a tangible kind of way, how do you feel like this experience is now kind of rippling out into your life?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So for me and for James in our relationship, so over, for the last 2.5, 3 years, we have gone through a really big shift because we've both been doing the work for a long time, and we called ourselves to this next layer that I just talked about. And so what I'm feeling now, because the integration is still happening. So when we have an experience like this and we set an intention like this, the integration is actually usually more powerful than the experience itself. And certainly for me, when we were in Egypt, when I came home, like I needed a holiday.
Totally.
Because it was so intense, because I was so incredibly present the whole time we were there, and we were on the go all the time, and we were on the go in so many different dimensions. And so I was traveling throughout the galaxy constantly, and my human was like having to keep up, and she did a really good job of keeping up. But coming back here, we're seemingly come back to like the same environment, but we've completely changed. I've had circumstances and situations that have arisen, and I've got to see where in the past I've given myself away, and it might be like the most subtle giveaway, but I have the opportunity to recalibrate even more. And what I've also noticed, because my intention was so strong, is that it's been happening really quickly for me. And that's the power of intention, because when we set that really strong intention, our soul is like, yes, you are so ready for this. I know you're so ready for this. And it's the human that goes, no, just hold up for a moment. And so what I've had to do since I got back is, again, bring that full presence, allow purifying to happen when it's happened. And constantly since I've been back, there have been situations that have arisen where in the past, like I might have felt a bit of fear about speaking up, or I might have felt like I didn't have what I needed. And I've been shown that all I need to do is come into full presence, take a breath, remember my source, and act from that place. And that's happened for both James and I. And we're now in a situation where something that has been happening for a decade for us is unfolding really, really quickly. And all of the old things of the we don't have what it takes, or any part of us that believed that we couldn't do this, is being challenged right now. And we're having to step up to the plate every single day almost.
Totally.
And we called that in. And I'm not saying that this is the circumstances for everybody, but for me personally, because I set this powerful intention, it's the demonstration of how powerful an intention is. And if you're not ready for it, don't set it.
Well, it's funny you say that, because what I was thinking before when you were sharing about integration is like the kind of most important part in many ways, is that there are so many codes that we can receive either from an experience like this, or from an event, or like some kind of teaching or course that we do or whatever. And the codes can literally just sit in our energetic field, and they may never integrate.
Yes.
And sometimes it takes the rest of your life to integrate the codes you received from this one trip you know, when you were 49 years old in Egypt for 2 weeks, you know, like
Yeah.
it's one of those things that I think because of our limitations of our human mind, we think that it's way more simple than that. You know, I've got the thing, I'm good, you know. But like you said, our readiness, our willingness, our capacity to take light in to our DNA, right?
Yes.
Like into our body is such an important part of the capacity for the integration of the codes that we're receiving.
Yeah.
And this kind of circles back to something we've spoken about on our podcast quite a few times, but there's so many factors of what gives us the capacity to take all of it in and actually integrate it. Because if we don't have our filtration systems in our body, if we don't have our body working in its most kind of optimum way, where our liver is working to detox, for example, like we have to create space for the new codes. And so some people don't sort of put all these pieces together, but it's really common that we will get like ascension flus and different types of like sicknesses that
Yeah.
cleanse the body in order to like take in what we receive. And there's always going to be like a limitation to our capacity for that because of the nature of being human. We can
Absolutely.
only take in what we have the availability for. And you know, if we're busy and we're working a lot, or we've got drama in our lives, or any of these different things, it limits the capacity to receive those codes. And so somebody might go to Egypt and feel like it was another travel thing,
Yeah.
you know, and not necessarily have any conscious awareness to what is available there. And we can also go there with the conscious awareness of the availability, but then not actually be able to bring it into the body and integrate it because of the limitations that we have. And so I love that you brought that forward about the integration and duration that it takes. And also, yeah, I just feel like that capacity piece is so important. Yeah, no.
Okay, but it's so true because the physical body isn't separate to all of those multidimensional aspects of ourself. Our physical body is actually the portal for all of those selves to move through into this humanity. And so if our physical vessel isn't in great condition and we set a really big intention and go and have an experience like that, it is quite likely that we're going to experience dis-ease because we're calling in all of this light into our body, and our body is like, okay, cool, I just need to detox and I need to move the filter all of these things through my body. And we're not sick, we're actually purifying and detoxing. And likewise, the emotional aspects that come up, because if I've set a big intention, and say, for instance, I've been invited many times since I've been back to, you know, try and slow things up or try and control things or whatever. And I've got to see where there's still these tendencies of me to try and hold on and create some sort of illusion of control, which we do as humans. And we're actually, when we are in alignment with the divine and when we're really channeling our God codes, we move with what presents because we are in full trust that I know where I'm going and I'm totally being guided to that place because I'm worthy, I'm ready, I have what it takes, I have all the resources that I need, and everything is in divine order. And so the emotional parts, the physical part is the first bit, like of this physical vessel. We have to look after our physical vessel. And then we've got to have an emotional connection as well. We've got to be, we have to allow ourselves to feel what's going on. We have to let go of what's no longer serving us. And none of it's wrong. The aspects, like when the fear comes up, it's not wrong. It's just an invitation for us to be able to see, radio, where am I still not trusting here? And I've called this in. So what needs to happen for me to align even more with source code?
Totally. And I feel like the reverence for all those pieces to land, like giving yourself the space and time to have it integrate. Because, you know, what I see with, I guess you would call them like ascension junkies, is this constant, like more, next thing, next thing, next thing, next thing. So someone might come off of a trip like that, and rather than creating the space for all these pieces and just conscious co-creation with all the pieces that are landing and integrating, and, you know, having the reverence for the integration phase. Instead, there's like, oh, I'll go and do this course, or I'll go and do this other thing, and just piles on top of each other. And again, coming back to that, like the field of the codes that are available in our fields, like all just sit in the energetic field because there's no space for integration. There's no reverence for the integration. And people wonder why they do all these things and don't get a shift or a change. And it's because there's a lack of integration that's happening, where they're actually walking the codes through their world, where they're actually like, I've learned, even at a, like, it's not even learning, it's like I've received all these codes, now I've got to be it in order for it to like fully land in the body. Because if we skip that part, it's all mental, it's all up here, and it's not actually down into the body. And the emotional piece is really important, and our body still needs to metabolize emotions. You know, it's a similar thing. Like, we have to be able to have the capacity to feel the emotions. If we don't have the physical capacity to metabolize emotion, then we just avoid being with it.
We've spoken about this before, like that's the aspect of spiritual bypassing. And when you were talking then, what was coming to me was it's actually reverence for humanity, like for our humanness. And the very first conversation that you and I had, which was the very first episode of The Beauty Way, was all about the reverence and respect for our mundane humanness. And there's books that have been written over decades where channels who have channeled, you know, the Pleiadians and things like that, talk about how these beings look at us here and level of awe for us as humans, because we've chosen to come to this playground, and nowhere else in the galaxy, in the universe, in anywhere do we get to live like we live here on Gaia. And when we call in the light and then we bring it into this body and we allow this body to commune with Gaia, with the earth, there is this incredible chemical reaction that occurs that she is like, thank you for this nourishment and this nurturing. And the star beings are like, yes, we've got this, you know, there's this galactic orgasm that's happening because this vessel is like channeling all of this energy both ways. And that's the beauty of what we're doing here. And so the more that we intentionally and consciously purify this vessel emotionally and physically, because that's our gift of being human, the emotional and the physical, the more that we get to channel the light onto earth. And we're not trying, the gift and the intention is not to try and get out of these bodies and to get off this planet, because this planet is fucking paradise.
Totally. Yeah. I'm curious what you feel, because obviously when we go and do something like this, there's always an exchange. So we are receiving, you know, an abundance of all the things. And obviously the intention that you're setting is that, like, the piece of the purification and the coming in as source code. And what do you feel is happening that you're offering that? Like, how do you see that process? What are you offering when you're walking those lands?
I love that question. The native peoples of the earth believe that we don't own the land. We are here as custodians of the land. And for a long time, we've chosen to adopt that way of thinking and that way of being as well. And in our society, that's kind of the opposite to the way our society has gone when you think of land ownership, for instance.
Mhm.
And so if I go back to that question of what is the exchange and what am I offering, when I'm walking with reverence on any land, in that moment, I am acknowledging that I am here as a custodian of this land upon which I find myself. So it doesn't matter where it is, if it's not considered to be my home, I am still a custodian of this land, because in this moment, which is the only one that counts, I am acting with reverence and respect for this land. And there's an interaction that happens between my song and the song of the land that creates harmony in that moment, which creates resonance, which amplifies the harmonic resonance of that land. And
Mhm.
so that's what I offer from an exchange perspective, is I have deep respect for any land upon which I find myself. And because of that, in every present moment that I'm choosing to walk that land, my song is in harmonic resonance with the song of the land. And that sends a message, it sends a pulse out into the universe, and the star beings, whatever, get to feel that. The field feels that harmonic resonance. And I'm the center and source of all of it, not from an ego perspective that my mind can't understand this, but I am the source of all of it. So I am the point of harmonic resonance. And when I think about that, that's a powerful energy exchange. And once again, if that's the case, if that's the place that I'm coming from, of course, I'm going to be respected by the beings and the field, because it notices that I notice.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. And I feel like the angle in which that comes from is super connected to the conscious awareness aspects. So
Yes.
the bits that you're aware of. And I feel like, you know, at a multidimensional level, what is happening is you are it's the image that I just had as I was about to say this was, it's like, when you're connected to the land, it's like the PowerPoint's plugged in.
Yes.
And so you, because you're typically in Australia, when you're there, you're plugged into that part. And so it's almost like the light switches on for the coding that is available in your consciousness beyond your human. And so, yes, that human layer is absolutely so freaking powerful and beautiful. And also, you're taking your entire team with you as you're standing on that land. And so, when you're co-creating with these two aspects of yourself and you're harmonizing them, that frequency that happens in that process is a gift to the land in which you stand on. Because what happens at a greater level is when, and you know this, when we harmonize different aspects of ourselves, then that is an upgrade to the greater consciousness of humanity. And when we do that in the land, on the land, at the location, there's something that happens for the greater codes that are available for the next person that travels there, because there's been a harmonization of the polarity of these two pieces. And it's so funny because this whole time I've been thinking about, I've always had this hilarious, I guess, relationship with how it works when it comes to like sharing codes, right? And it goes in both directions. And the way that I've always seen it, have you ever seen the movie Gattaca?
Yes, I have seen it.
Is it Ethan Hawke?
Yes, it is Ethan Hawke, I'm pretty sure.
And he has to wash himself every day
Yeah.
and comb his hair and everything because he's pretending to be somebody else. He's like
Yes.
yeah. And so I always remember that when I think about how we code, like, you know, because what's happening when I've heard people say, you know, we sprinkle our codes wherever we go, you know, but I think about it in a really gross practical aspect of our DNA is literally shedding from our skin in every single micro moment of our existence. We're losing hair, we're like doing all kinds of things, our saliva, like all the DNA that's mixed in. And when we walk places, we are literally sprinkling our codes. And so our DNA is in the land there now where we've traveled. And so all of the coding and the historical multidimensional like library of information that your consciousness has experienced is now literally in those tombs, in those places, because you have now physically been there. And so I feel like there's, you know, my understanding is that there's always parts of that we can do at a quantum level. And then what happens when we go at a physical level is that there is an even greater like connection. And it always makes me think about how intricately connected we are, because every single human that's ever traveled to Egypt, for example, some of their coding is in the sand, you know, and when we're walking on the sand, we're walking on like dead skin cells that hold DNA. And I think about it when we drink water, we're constantly drinking the DNA of our not just our ancestors, but of all the humans on the planet, because it's completely continuously cycling through. And it brings back this like oneness realization of how deeply connected we are. You know, when we come into connection with somebody, we're sharing DNA. It's always happening. And so I feel like there is that the light codes that you have come to anchor on the planet when you step foot in those locations, there are multidimensional aspects of you that are doing grid work or harmonization work that is beyond what you can even ever comprehend as a human, as well as the amazing things that we can comprehend as a human.
Yeah, amazing. And you know what I was thinking when you started that conversation, and just the visual of a human walking any land is, we've been conditioned and taught to think that we're quite powerless really, and we're just like this one little speck. But the way that we're sharing this information and that it's coming through, and it really hit home whenever what you said about walking the earth is, if you think about it, in that moment, you are the most powerful being that exists. And everything that is moving through you in both directions is the alpha omega. And when you set this intention to be so connected, you are source, and everything stems from you. And always, in all the work that I've ever done, it's always so important for me to really emphasize the power that we have. You know, we are soul infused beings, which makes us so powerful, because our soul is an aspect, it's a facet of spirit. Spirit is a facet of source. Source only separates because it wants to experience itself. And so we are here because source wants to experience itself in the world. And if we can actually attune to that, we get to attune to the power that we are, and we get to recognize the gift that we've been given to create something for future and past generations.
Totally. And it's funny because when you're talking about the separation, it's like even the separation is just an illusion in this perspective of like, yes, we're separate, but then go back to 2 minutes ago when we're talking about how deeply connected we are and there's no separation at all. And it's funny because it's only our like human limited conscious experience that has us have the experience of being separate.
Yeah.
Even in the conversation of like source separating in order for us to in order for it to have all these multi experiences, you know, that is absolutely true. And we're still so deeply connected that it's just, it like starts to blow your brain when you get to that stage. It's like,
It does. because we're constantly affecting each other in the field.
Exactly.
And so go back to what we said about the emotional body. That's why it's so important for us to do the emotional clearing and to have the emotional literacy, because we get to, if we can, if we're hearing all of these concepts and we're like, it's blowing our mind, then if we get to interact with someone and it's creating an anger within us, or it's creating something else, we get to really tune into that anger and ask what it, ask the purpose of it, because it is a purpose, because that person is simply an aspect or a facet of me that is showing me something that I'm ready to integrate into my field and clear, so that I can be a more powerful source code. And so it's this constant remembering, constant acknowledgement of, like, it's a gift that we're separate. And the constant acknowledgement that we get to see everyone else in a different light as how we see ourselves, and then a constant invitation to acceptance and surrender that everyone has a choice. And choice is such a powerful aspect of being human as well, and such a gift of our humanity too, that we get to choose in every single moment. And when we bring those three aspects into this moment, we get to see that, okay, well, that means that I get to have a choice in every moment. And if I'm source, then if my intention is pure and I make choices aligned with that purity, I'm going to create more that's in that harmonic resonance.
Totally. Yeah. And a question that just popped in when you were sharing that was, what do you believe because I feel like we've kind of already touched on this, but I'm curious to hear like how you would put it, is what do you feel like the long-term effect is of consciously aware individuals going and doing this type of work? What does it have? What's the ripple that it has on our kind of greater journey?
In the Pleiadian Agenda, the book, The Pleiadian Agenda, which was channeled by Barbara Hand Clow, they say we're basically experiencing ourselves backwards. And so the more conscious individuals intentionally go and do this grid work, the ripple effect is that we are finding ourselves in this golden age, because more and more of us are attuning to that frequency. And it's like we're going like this, and the earth is coming with us. Like, she's not separate to us. Go back to what we've just talked about. She's not separate, and all of the technology is already there. And so this ripple effect, and if you think of the waters, and when you see the pyramids in real life, it's like, how on earth was this done? That's a whole nother perspective.
Totally.
But when you think of the power of the water, and it had to have a role to play in the creation of these chambers, and water and resonance is another aspect. More of us that consciously do this work and wake up to it. Like I said at the start, like, I've been doing this work with my family for years without actually realizing what we were doing. And when we start to realize it and we do it from a consciousness, then we are bringing the whole of humanity with us, because that's the frequency that we're holding for humanity. When I hold this frequency, I'm looking out into the world, and that's the world that I'm seeing. And so from a human perspective, the more of us that do that, we're going to create this more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, which is the beauty way. And in one of Paul Selig's books, which you introduced me to a couple of years ago, he says that in 6 generations from, no, it's not even 6 generations, just a few generations from now, these children are not going to be born with the same fear and powerlessness codes that our generations were coded with, because we've cleared those. Like, how exciting is that?
I know, it's so freaking exciting. And that's basically, you know, that is such a perfect place to sum that point up, because I think it's really important to, I guess, for anybody who's listening who has, you know, traveled the world and done it somewhat unconsciously, you know, from that multidimensional aspect, is that it's happening irrespective of whether you're conscious of it or not.
Yeah.
You know, one realization that I had in my kind of ascension of consciousness journey was how I've been to 45 or 50 countries, and I have traveled all over the world. I've been to so many different places and spaces, and not many of those have been since my consciousness sort of had woken to my conscious awareness of what was happening when I was in these places. And even then, there's been times, even since then, where, you know, I'm not present enough in the moment to have an awareness of what's happening beyond, you know, the fact that I'm just eating dinner at some place or whatever, you know, having some type of an interaction with a local person or whatever. And I think it's really important for people, because I think that when they're not having a conscious experience, they think that nothing's happening. And so when their soul is pulling them or taking them to all these different places or doing these different activities or whatever, it's important to know that it's happening regardless, and that there are aspects of ourselves that are merging or harmonizing or whatever. And to your point, when we are doing it at a conscious level, the impact and the power that is happening in that kind of, it's almost like a 10x's, because it's like there's this quote that I'm like on the verge of remembering, and it's got something to do with, you know, one person, I'm gonna like totally butcher it, but it's got something to do with like one person doing this consciously is equivalent to like a million people doing it unconsciously.
Yeah.
And that's the level that it amplifies for the anchoring of the golden age. Because when we, like you said, are doing it at that really conscious level, we are sort of, it's not that it's better than, it's just that it has a more potent pulse of frequency, because there's so much intention behind it. And so even like the million that are doing it unconsciously, like it's still part of the pie. It's still important. And when we choose to expand and build the awareness of even to the microest level of our awareness of what's happening, even just having an intention, even if you don't see anything, you don't have the different lives showing up, and you don't know what's happening when you touch the wall and all the things, just having the intention, like, and allowing all of that to unfold in the field is, you know, so much more powerful than doing it in a really kind of unconscious, unaware sort of a way. And so I totally agree that the ripple effect is that we are bringing it. It's almost like we're bringing it to us.
Yes.
It's like the golden age is like here, and we just get in it a little bit closer with every sort of step of conscious co-creation. And it's funny when I say that, because one of our beautiful friends who we've had on this podcast, Kerry, talks about all the time, is how our dreams are already in existence, and all we have to do is become a frequency match for it to show up. And it's not about creating it or manifesting it or bringing it into reality. It's about shifting to a state where it's available. And I think the same is true for the golden age, and the capacity for our children to grow into the world without the fear and all of the things is these steps that, you know, some of us are taking, and that have been on a journey to have enough to choose the awareness and the intention and the consciousness creating.
There's so much in what you just said, because the intention, again, anyone who's listening to this which doesn't really understand it and hasn't, like, they resonate with what we're saying, what I would invite them to do is to, like, every single day, just set an intention for yourself, just to set, you know, to wake up in the morning and go, right, today I want to experience joy. And what you do then is, during the day, you come back to that intention. It's your North Node, and you work from that place. Because so many people will, because we've been taught to be so powerless, that they'll set an intention and then something will happen in the external world and they'll go, it doesn't work. Like, I'm not powerful enough. And what you're talking about coming into energetic alignment is actually the secret of it's inner space. Like, we are traveling, we're not traveling to outer space, we're traveling to inner space. And the more deeply we go to inner space, the more spaciousness we create for ourselves, which then comes out and we get to experience that from the inside into the external world. And that's why I can be standing next to someone else and I could be looking out at the world and just going, this is freaking beautiful. And the other person's like, this is disgusting. What are you talking about? Because the intention and the spaciousness that's been created in my vessel with the work that's been done. And so, yeah, we're we are literally shifting the trajectory. And the other thing was also, there's never nothing happening. There's never nothing happening. The only reason we think that something is not happening is because we've gone into a limiting belief about ourselves and about our own abilities and our own powerlessness. Because if we believe that there's nothing happening, then we're looking at the world and seeing ourselves as separate to the world, as separate to everyone else. And that's actually not the truth. And so then the one more thing that I want to say about that is the aspect of judgment. And we're judging ourselves, we're judging the world, we're judging all of it when we believe that there's nothing happening. And we don't deserve to be judged. We deserve to be revered and respected. And when we're revered and respected, our human naturally falls into resonance and alignment with that, because we're actually offering the acceptance.
Totally. And in every moment that we are aware that we're in judgment, it's just another opportunity for transmutation. It's just another opportunity to recognize, oh, wow, that's how I'm seeing myself. That's how I'm seeing this experience. And not judge the fact that I'm judging, because it just amplifies it, but just come into like, okay, cool. I see you. Thank you. And there's something so much more beyond this that we can experience if we come into the integration of the part that is making the judgment in the first place. Yeah. And I totally agree that, the limitation to like what is happening is only in our judgment, in our perception that it has to look a particular way in order for it to be working, or in order for it to be doing something. And, I feel like for those whose kind of clear senses are less visual, they often kind of, I feel like they have a bit of a tougher run when it comes to the judgment, because I feel like there's such a like pedestaling of the visual experience versus the like feeling and the sensation. Like, for example, when you said your body got really hot, people would be like, oh, but I didn't see anything. And it's like, it must have just been the aircon, it's like, no, have reverence for the sensation just as much as somebody else might have an experience of something that's visual. Just because you've seen it more visually doesn't make it more powerful.
Yeah.
And we have some people have more auditory senses where they hear and sense through, and then the feeling in the body, and all these different ways that we can, communicate with what's happening. And I think it's important to not deny those parts, and I think so often when people will have even a thought form where they'll be like, they'll think, oh, I could totally imagine myself singing in this chamber. And then they disregard it because they're like, oh, no, that's just me making it up. I'm just thinking about that. It's like, no, you're literally picking up on a frequency in the space that gave you that thought. you know?
Yeah.
And I think about this all the time when I'm in random places and a random, like super random memory will come to me of being in another place doing something totally random. Like the most recent one that I just was thinking of just then was there's this like yoga studio that I went to in London, and for whatever reason, every so often it'll just pop up into my like
Yeah.
out of it completely nowhere, and I'm like, why the hell am I thinking about that? You know, and like that's a really basic version of what I'm talking about, but we're constantly tapped into all of the different timelines and different places and pieces, and like don't disregard those little micro thought forms that happen, because if
Yeah.
you're not super visual and maybe you're not like as tapped into the sensation in your body, if you are picking up on little pieces, like trust them and start to
Yeah.
build the muscle of, no, this isn't just random. This
Yeah.
is actually something to presence.
Yeah, that was a really big thing for me, like that whole visual thing, because I wasn't a visual person and I'm still not really a visual person. I'm very much a feeling and auditory person. And and because I was such a skeptic, if I couldn't see it, I would
Yeah.
actually, I would discount so many things. And
Mhm.
then when I started on my own journey and I actually started doing yoga, that was when all of these seemingly random things would come into my field. And that's the other thing I want to say is when this does happen for you, if you do experience this, don't try and figure it out. Like, because that's just dropping into the head. It's literally just be in the body. And when I started yoga and I would be lying there or I'd be in a pose and all of these and random thoughts would come to me, I had no other choice but to just be with them. Like I couldn't figure them out because I was trying to focus on like balancing my body or something. And so the body just wants to integrate the codes in whatever experience. And I have the same thing. Like there'll be these seemingly there's a few events over time or people that will come to me, and I'm like, what's that doing coming to me now? And I've learned to just allow it to be there, because for some reason my consciousness wants to experience that memory in this moment. And I don't need to know why. I don't need to figure it out. I just need to let it happen.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's so much more than just a memory. Like
Yeah.
sometimes I think we are actually, have you seen the TV series The Flash?
I don't think I've seen that one, no.
So for anyone who wants to have like a really awesome cinematic experience of some of the pieces that I'm about to say, it's a great TV series to watch because of the way that they jump and hop timelines.
Yeah.
And one of so the Flash is, if you don't know the character, maybe it's Marvel or something like that. He's got this capacity to move so fast that he can like change.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
He can travel in time.
Yeah.
And anyway, so he does this example in one of the episodes. I don't know when it is or how far it is, but he does this example where they draw it on a board of like what it looks like when you kind of hop and where the time points join. And I think so often, sometimes we'll have like I think that the most kind of extreme version of this is like deja vu. It's like when we're having a time point crossover where there's a timeline where that moment has actually already happened in a slightly different version of yourself that's having a slightly micro different version of that experience than you're having now. But there's like a crossing over of those two different timelines. And that's why it feels so visceral. And you're like, oh, that was so weird. Like, what's happening? And sometimes when those like random memories are coming to us, I think it's the same thing. We're just
Yeah.
tapping into a version of us that's either having that experience, or there's something that had happened in that experience that you're not consciously aware of, where there might have been codes exchanged or something that are like integrating or uploading, or, something that, again, so far beyond our mental ability as a human to understand. And like you said, not discounting what comes through, and starting to not even say it's weird or crazy,
Yeah.
and really be like, oh, there's something happening. Great. Period. Like it doesn't have to be anything more. Like you said, you don't have to work it out.
Yeah.
Just having a like, I know that there's something happening and I don't know about it, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, totally. And when you were just talking about the Flash, have you seen Everything Everywhere All at Once?
No, but you've told me about it before, and I feel like I need to watch it.
So anyone who's listening to this and wants to have a felt experience of what we've been talking about this whole episode, I highly recommend watching this movie, because it is literally like this very human family that is going through this process of embodiment and shifting timelines, if you like. And she's she intentionally learns from a place of like not having any idea, intentionally learns to tap into versions of herself to bring back skills and resources into this moment so that she can create the next thing that she wants to create. It's such a great movie.
That's awesome. And that reminds me of another one. Have you seen, I think I've mentioned this one a while ago, and I'm not sure if you've seen it, Arrival.
I don't know if I've seen Arrival.
Oh, we'll put it on your list. It's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Okay.
Um, you might not realize why it's fantastic until you're kind of 3/4 of the way through, but at some point in time, it'll click what's happening, and you'll just be like, "What? That makes so much sense."
Is that a series or is a movie?
It's a movie.
It's a movie. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and it's basically this woman's experience with an ET vessel that comes and lands on the planet, and how she like communicates with them and all this different cool stuff. But again, there's these themes of how we interconnected with varying different like realities or versions of ourselves, and and that's a conversation for another day, because I feel like we could totally just go on for another hour about the power that's available when we understand that the future version of me already exists.
Yeah.
And, I'm just like, this is what's happening, but it's there already. So we can communicate and tap into that whenever we want to, by building the communication threads between that.
And I think looping it back to Egypt, that's the beauty of Egypt is calling us to the future versions of ourselves. And that's why so many people are being called there right now, because there's a huge awakening process happening on Earth, where we are cosmologically, and there are so many people that are responding to this knowing within themselves of, we have this capacity to be able to live like this as humans. So maybe I'm going to follow that, and I'm going to just experience the land in Egypt and its power, and let my body feel the resonance of that.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, so awesome.
So awesome. Well, that was awesome. I feel like it's a perfect time to call it into completion. And so thank you for sharing all of these beautiful things. And I feel like we barely even touched the surface on half of your experiences that you had. But I feel like it was a really beautiful and expansive conversation. So thanks.
Yeah, me too. Thank you everyone for joining us today. See you next time.
See ya.